The JonBenét Ramsey case has been a shadow over true crime history for decades. A nightmare wrapped in unanswered questions. This isn't your average whodunit. It's the kind of story that sends shivers down your spine and keeps you up at night. And now, new evidence has emerged, threatening to unravel everything we thought we knew about that fateful Christmas night. Y'all, there is a lot to unpack here, so settle in, brace yourself, and let's get right into it.
Past Santa Claus in his sleigh and a double row of candy canes, deputy coroners brought the body of 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey from her upscale home. Neighbors described the young girl as beautiful and polite. In 1995, she won the Little Miss Colorado pageant. Boulder police won't comment on her cause of death, only saying that she wasn't shot or stabbed. They are investigating her death as a homicide. So far, no arrests have been made.
To give you guys some context, JonBenét Ramsey was just 6 years old when her life was cut tragically short.
Our next contestant is JonBenét Ramsey.
If JonBenét Ramsey was still alive, she'd be about to turn 32. Instead, a little girl who loved to show off in junior beauty pageants only made it to 6.
She was this adorable little beauty queen with blonde curls and a smile that could light up the room. On Christmas night, 1996, something horrifying happened in her family's massive Boulder, Colorado mansion. The next morning, her mom, Patsy Ramsey, found a ransom note that sent chills down her spine.
What's going on there, ma'am? There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God! Please.
But just hours later, JonBenét's body was discovered in their basement. And as you might already feel by now, the whole thing was extremely sus from the very beginning.
I quickly pulled the tape off her mouth and her hands were bound. And I couldn't get the knot untied. It was really tightly tied. She had been strangled with a garrote. It was so deeply embedded in her skin that I didn't see it.
Now, here's where the real drama starts. The case exploded into this insane media frenzy. People could not stop talking about it. Her parents, Patsy and John Ramsey, became the center of all the suspicion, with people wondering if there was an accident they tried to cover up or whether it was someone from outside the house. Everyone had a theory, and honestly, some of them were wild. The press tore the family apart, and it's like the cops didn't know what they were doing either.
In their minds, on the first day, that it was the parents. And we just got to find the evidence to be able to prove that. But we know it was the parents because it's always the parents. You know, they made up their mind on day one. And the conclusion was that my daughter.
But loves, believe it or not, the most crucial evidence, DNA, wasn't fully tested back then. Don't forget there was also a ransom note, which we're gonna get into in just a second. The point is that this case was a dumpster fire from the get-go. And here we are nearly 3 decades later, still searching for answers. All right, moving on to the ransom note mystery and its haunting questions. This is super important because the new evidence is sending chills down everyone's spine. Years later, advanced DNA technology might be the thing that cracks this case wide open. The DNA found on JonBenét's clothes wasn't from her family, but that's not the news. The most gut-wrenching bit was the fact that the police literally had this info within weeks of her murder, but they just ignored it. In case you're wondering how that's possible, you'd be shocked at the amount of helpful evidence police just let slide.
DNA evidence found on JonBenét's clothing, including her blood-stained underwear and from her fingernail clippings, ruled out the entire Ramsey family, but it did find a stranger's DNA.
What's even worse is that for years there has been a growing push from JonBenét's dad, John Ramsey, to have this evidence tested using today's cutting-edge methods. He has been fighting tooth and nail saying, let's hand this over to experts. But for some twisted reason, the Boulder police have been acting shady about it, dragging their feet and refusing to cooperate. Because it just doesn't make sense why they would not want to solve the case. It's giving, we don't want to be proven wrong energy, and honestly, it's beyond frustrating for the Ramseys family.
I have some hope, yeah. I think DNA technology is advanced, continues to advance, and if it's used, may lead to a solution. I'm going to keep pushing, certainly, as long as I live, that the right things be done, but it may not be solved. I don't know.
In case y'all forgot how bizarre this ransom note was, it was 3 pages long, y'all. Like, who writes a novel during a crime and then goes ahead to demand $118,000, which was oddly specific? Turns out that was the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus. I don't know about y'all, but that doesn't sound exactly like a coincidence to me. It literally feels like a major inside job. Experts have said that the note was probably written in the house, like after the crime happened. JonBenét's mom, Patsy, has had her handwriting under scrutiny for years in connection to this ransom note, but there was still no big break on the case. It's understandable how some people feel that the whole thing reeks of someone trying way too hard to stage a scene. But y'all, here is where things take a dark turn. The autopsy revealed that JonBenét had been strangled with a wire, but the evidence clearly showed that whoever did this wasn't just trying to stage a kidnapping. They were doing something much more sinister. The use of a stun gun to incapacitate her was not something you'd expect from a family member. It points to someone methodical and predatory, someone who planned this out in the most disturbing way.
And clearly quite a significant tool in the murderer's
It's a specialized
MO.
weapon,
Yep.
very unique.
Even crazier, just months after JonBenét's demise, another girl in the same neighborhood was attacked in her bed. The similarities were terrifying. Like JonBenét, this girl was SA'd in her home, and the intruder escaped without a trace. Police never seriously connected the 2 cases. Seriously, how many predators could there be in one quiet town? It was a simple case of missed opportunity to solve both cases. No cap.
Mom and daughter were the only ones home. Mom retires, goes to sleep in her room. Daughter is in her room. And while daughter is asleep, a perpetrator entered the home. Her mom is awoken. And so she actually encounters the individual. He actually passes by her and jumps off a second-story patio or deck and was able to escape. Well, when you look at that case and you look at some of the things that happened with JonBenét, you have to ask yourself, right? Like, could this be the same person?
Fast forward to very recently, Netflix did what it does best, creating documentaries on such mind-boggling incidences. And just like that, JonBenét's story started making the rounds after years of going cold. Not only has this recent Netflix documentary been making waves, it's putting the spotlight back on this case and raising questions that should have been answered ages ago. The docu digs into everything from the ransom note to the DNA evidence to the police's complete mishandling of the crime scene. And let me tell you, the tea is scalding. For example, when JonBenét's dad found her body in the basement, he picked her up and carried her upstairs. Heartbreaking, yes, but it also contaminated the crime scene.
I quickly pulled the tape off her mouth and her hands were bound. And I couldn't get the knot untied. It was really tightly tied. She had been strangled with a garrote. It was so deeply embedded in her skin that I didn't see it.
And don't even get me started on the fact that the Boulder police treated the Ramseys as suspects from day 1.
There's nothing more dangerous than a police department that's made up its mind, because they are totally excluding anything that conflicts with that conclusion.
They were so laser focused on the parents that they ignored over 2,000 other leads. 2,000! Just sitting there while the cops were busy building a case against the family.
I did not kill my child. You know, quit screwing around asking me about things that are ridiculous and let's find the person that did this.
And now, new forensic techniques could identify the killer if the police would just hand over the evidence. DNA experts have cracked cases decades older than this one using these methods. So the real question is, why are the police refusing to hand over the evidence? What are they hiding? And let's not forget, JonBenét's brother, Burke Ramsey, who has been the subject of endless speculation, he broke his silence years later, saying that he thinks it was a pedo in the pageant audience. And honestly, that makes sense. But if Burke's theory holds water, it raises even more questions about how police let a monster slip through the cracks. Burke Ramsey was just 9 years old when his involvement. The Netflix documentary even hinted at some bizarre family dynamics, like the whole pineapple theory. You know how undigested pineapple was found in JonBenét's stomach? And people think that Burke might have hit her during a fight over it. But y'all, none of that explains the ransom note, the DNA, or the stun gun marks found on her body. It is all a stretch, and it just feels like another distraction from the real evidence. Speaking of distractions, let's talk about the intruder theory, because this is where things start to get really cold. Some investigators, like the legendary detective Lou Smith, believed an outsider broke into the house, and that there was actually an open window in the basement with a suitcase right below it, as if someone used it to climb in and out.
Yeah, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes, right, to know that this is what we call a clue, right? You got an open window, you got a scuff mark on the wall, you have a suitcase. On the suitcase is some broken glass. You can actually see some broken glass on the suitcase. So
there were scuff marks on the wall, shards of glass on the floor, and even fibers on the suitcase that matched JonBenét's clothing. Police missed a lot in this case. And then there's also the DNA found on JonBenét's clothes. The incompetence is unreal, y'all. But wait, it gets even wilder. Remember how I mentioned that similar attack on another girl in Boulder just months after JonBenét? It was just as chilling, and the two had so many parallels. It is straight up chilling. Amy and JonBenét even knew each other. They went to the same dance school, and yet the Boulder police barely investigated the connection.
In law enforcement, to hear the story of the similar attack so soon afterwards and think, oh, that would be worth checking out.
You always
they could be linked.
Very much so.
So there was no attempt to investigate a link between the cases, compare them, as you say, compare DNA.
I'm not aware of it.
No one was ever charged with this, and the victim and her family eventually moved away from Boulder.
They didn't even preserve key evidence from Amy's case, throwing away any chance of linking the two crimes.
This is a connection. This is too similar to our case.
Our next contestant, Ms. JonBenét Ramsey.
They blew it off. Though they were the attack, the same detectives investigated that case as investigated ours.
I mean, it was just sheer buffoonery. The Boulder police threw away the bed sheets where she was assaulted on, so there was no ability to go back and do DNA testing. I mean, they, similar to us, just absolutely bungled this investigation.
If the police misconduct is making you mad, wait until you hear the grand jury situation. In 1999, the jury actually voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey for child abuse, resulting in her demise. But the district attorney refused to press charges due to a lack of evidence. The fact that this was kept secret for years only adds to the messiness of this entire case. It's like every piece of this puzzle is either missing or deliberately hidden, leaving everyone, family, friends, and investigators grasping at straws. There was yet another plot twist in 2008 when DNA testing officially cleared the Ramseys of any involvement. The evidence pointed to an unknown male, which means the real criminal is still out there. But even with all these, the case remained cold. Why, you ask? Because the Boulder police viewed the evidence through a pigeonhole. They were ready to go to any length not to admit that they mishandled this case.
Given today's technology, it can be solved. I'm convinced of it if that technology is used. That's all we're asking the police to do, is use the latest technology. They've got to go outside. They don't have the capacity. If they do that and we come up empty-handed, then I'll say, well, thank you. At least we tried. We tried everything that could be done. Right now, we're not doing that.
You guys, this case has haunted the Ramseys for decades. Patsy Ramsey passed away in 2006 without ever knowing who killed her daughter. And John Ramsey is still fighting for answers at over 80 years old. His latest move has been to petition the Colorado governor to force the Boulder police to release the DNA evidence. He could even team up with genetic genealogy experts, because if anyone can crack this case, it's a pro. But without access to the DNA, everyone's hands were tied. So what was next for the JonBenét Ramsey case? Well, the Colorado Cold Case Review team has recently stepped in to re-evaluate the evidence. They've made recommendations to the Boulder police, but so far, no major breakthroughs have been announced. It's frustrating to say the least, but there is still hope that justice will be served.
And therefore, yeah. And more breaking news on the JonBenét Ramsey, 26 years after her murder. Boulder police say they'll start working with the Colorado Cold Case Review Team next year. They've been working with a private DNA lab for decades, but now they say they'll work with the team's forensic, analytical, and investigative experts. JonBenét's murder the day after Christmas remains a priority for Boulder police.
But so far, we've allegedly got DNA evidence pointing to an unknown male, a ransom note that looks more like a bad movie script, and a crime scene so mishandled that experts have been shaking their heads for decades.
These are the 5 very unique variations of the letter E that the ransom note writer and Patsy Ramsey share. Here, Patsy's C is very distinct because it is compressed, it's pointed on the left side, and you see that it's also similar in the C on the ransom note. That's a Q. That looks like a number 8. How many people write their Qs with the number 8? I don't. Do you? In this case, I found over 200 similarities between Patsy Ramsey's handwriting and the ransom note. So it's highly probable that Patsy Ramsey wrote the ransom note.
Another wild turn is that people have been able to piece together the horrifying possibility of a possible link between JonBenét's case and other unsolved crimes in the area. Still taking us back to the main point, the Boulder police incompetence stinks to the high heavens. Imagine how groundbreaking that would be. But for now, it's all just sitting there, collecting dust, while the Ramsey family continues to fight for answers. One of the most compelling theories involves Michael Helgoth, a local man who worked in a nearby junkyard. Helgoth reportedly bragged about getting a big payday right before JonBenét's homicide, and the case ruled as having taken his own life right after the police announced they were zeroing in on new suspects. On the flip side though, Helgoth's DNA didn't match the evidence found at the crime scene. So still, many believed he wasn't working alone, which leaves the door open for an accomplice theory. But let's not forget another bizarre element of this case: media. You see, the Ramsey family's interactions with law enforcement from day one were awful, since the Boulder police treated them as sole suspects, even when the evidence didn't fully add up. And y'all, the media didn't make it any better. The tabloid frenzy turned this tragedy into a full-blown circus, with every move the Ramseys made scrutinized like it was a reality TV show. There's this infamous CNN interview where Patsy Ramsey warned parents to keep your babies close. Now, while that might have come from a good place, the media flipped it and fueled the fire for those who believed that the family was hiding something.
Large portion of the world that still thinks the family had something to do with it. And it's only because of why? It's because of the narrative that has been pushed for so many years that it had to be somebody in the family. Not based on evidence, based on what they believe, because their theory was that from the very beginning.
Now, if we're talking about suspects, we can't ignore John Mark Carr, the guy who confessed to taking JonBenét's life in 2006. But his story didn't hold up under scrutiny. His DNA didn't match the evidence, and parts of his confession were straight up lies. Like, who even does that? It was yet another dead end that added to the frustration and heartbreak surrounding this case.
John Mark Carr, he made headlines all around the world. The former Georgia teacher claimed he was involved in JonBenét Ramsey's on Christmas Day in 1996. Colorado authorities tracked down Carr in Thailand and he was brought back to the United States. But ultimately, his DNA did not match that of some DNA on the murder scene. So Carr was released with no charges. What is Carr now saying about the case? John Mark Carr went on the record. John Mark, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Greta.
How you doing?
Okay.
Just okay, or tell me what's going on in your life?
Well, a lot has changed, definitely, since last summer. Last summer I was working in a beautiful school, and I've been a teacher for 10 years.
Just the thought that the mastermind could still be alive and might be brought to justice is a bit reassuring, but only if it ever comes to pass.
The facts are that the players in this case are still alive today, right? People with institutional knowledge are still here. Witnesses are still here. And the killer is likely still alive, right? He hasn't aged out, right? So if you look at those facts, the opportunity presents itself that we can, everything's lining up just right, that we can finally find this killer.
As we wrap this up, let's not forget the real victim here. JonBenét was a bright, vibrant little girl whose life was cut tragically short. Her memory deserves better than the circus that surrounded her case. Whether it's through new technology, fresh eyes on the evidence, or sheer determination, the fight for justice continues. And y'all, we will be here every step of the way, keeping you updated on the twists and turns in this hauntingly unsolved mystery.
So, I mean, it still surfaces. You know, I'll see a little girl hanging under her dad's hand walking down the street, and it tugs at my heart. But I do believe that JonBenét's in heaven. I will see her again in some way. My little brain can't comprehend how that will be, but I have faith in that. And she's safe.
If JonBenét was alive today, she'd be 33. For the Ramsey family, her has meant a lifetime of anguish and suffering that's taken its toll. John Andrew will soon take over from his elderly father in the family's battle for justice. And he vows not to give up until the killer is behind bars.
The facts are that the players in this case are still alive today, right? People with institutional knowledge are still here. Witnesses are still here. And the killer is likely still alive, right? He hasn't aged out, right? So if you look at those facts, the opportunity presents itself that we can, everything's lining up just right, that we can finally find this killer.
That's it for now, loves, and don't forget to turn on your notification buttons for major updates and breaking news.